Hello and welcome to another episode of the How to Create VR tutorial series, where you learn by watching other VR, AR, and MR professionals create the magic. I'm Marcelo Lewin, an immersive content evangelist, creator, producer, and the guy behind howtocreatevr.com. My guest creator today is Kirby Shabaga, an AR, VR creator who enjoys listening to customers, identifying pain points, and working through the ideation process with diverse teams to prototype and solve business problems. Today, Kirby will be showing us how to set up your Summerian projects for delivery to Desktop HMDs. But before we get started, I want to remind you to register at howtocreatevr.com. It's free, and registration gets you access to video tutorials, practice assets, podcast interviews, ability to favorite, comment, create watch lists, plus much more. It's really quick and easy. Just visit howtocreatevr.com and click on the Register for Free button. All right, Kirby, welcome to the tutorial series.
Hi.
Actually, I should say welcome back, right? This is your second one.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, no, we had a lot of fun. You created another tutorial on how to create spawners in Amazon Sumerian, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool, where you're able to take an object and basically duplicate it via scripting, right? Using inside of Sumerian.
That's right. Yeah, we looked at state machines and scripting.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I know today you're going to be showing us how to set up a project specifically for Desktop HMDs, right?
Yeah, so we're going to create a template that we can reuse if you have to create a collection of scenes. This would be a time saver for you as well.
Right. And for those that didn't watch the other tutorial, we'll put it in our show notes anyway, but a real quick background of yourself. How did you get into VR?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I was fortunate to get a tour of the Valve office and went through some demos with the HTC Vive development kit. And that was really exciting and kind of opened up my eyes to possibilities and problems that could be solved using VR.
So why did you pick Amazon Sumerian to focus on versus, let's say, Unity or Unreal Engine?
It's mainly because it is web-based. And I'm a pretty big believer in the open web as both a way for creators to build experiences and applications, but even more so how they can easily distribute those experiences. You simply share a URL and the audience can view that experience. The other thing that's interesting is because it's a new development platform and tool, it's kind of neat to be there at the beginning and participate in the community and watch the tool gain more features and capabilities.
Yeah, definitely. It's nice to be at the ground level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yep. Totally. All right. Well, Kirby, I'm going to move out of the way, let you get started on the tutorial. And if I have any questions, I'll jump right in.
All right. So what we're going to do is look at creating a template in Amazon Sumerian, a template that can support various VR headsets. And the way we're going to start off is by creating a new project. Just think of that as a folder that's going to contain a collection of scenes and assets and templates. So I'm going to go ahead and call this Super Secret Project. Okay, now we're going to go back to Home on the dashboard. And down here, you'll actually see that there are some built-in templates. We're going to go with default lighting as the starting for ours. Super secret template. So the very first thing we're going to do is look at completing this AWS configuration. We're going to basically run through a tutorial, which I've already set up, but I just want to quickly show you that Amazon has this Cognito setup tutorial. They're using CloudFormation, and the idea here is that you just simply launch this stack, which will generate what's called the Cognito Identity Pool ID. So if I come back to this, I can now enter in my ID and get that set up. The reason that's important is it will give our Sumerian scenes access to Amazon Lex and Poly so that we can use the hosts.
Just to clarify, Lex and Poly, that's for speech, right? So in other words, one is for translating text to speech, and the other one is for understanding speech, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Which is which?
So Poly takes text and converts it to speech.
And understanding speech, in other words, when I speak to it, it's Lex.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. Thank you.
And we're just going to do Poly for this one. So the next entity that we're going to add into our template is going to be an Amazon Sumerian host. So what I'm going to do is just search for one that I know exists called Grace. There's 4 hosts to choose from with different clothing. I'm going to pick Grace Hoodie, add that to our scene. And once that loads up in the bottom left in the Assets panel, we'll drag that entity into our scene. So in the Assets panel, we can filter by different types. So I'm going to filter by entity. And there we have our Grace host. We'll just drop that onto our entities pane and wait for that to load into our scene.
And while we're waiting, so far, you're doing all this just to put something in the scene for us to look at, right? So far, we don't have anything that's VR related where we can actually put on a desktop HMD and actually go in, right? Right now, it wouldn't work if we did that.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yep.
Perfect.
So our host has been added to the origin at 000. It's a little hard to see. So we have a couple of choices. We can come up here and frame the selection or just press the keyboard accelerator F. So now we can see we have Grace in the scene. And one of the components that's added to a host is this speech component, which allows us to select a voice that our host will have. There's quite a selection, I believe 27 voices to choose from. We're just going to stick with the default and go ahead and look at our next part of configuring our template. In speech files, right now we don't have anything for our host to say, so we'll hit the plus button and create an empty speech file. That opens up the text editor for us, and the first thing that's kind of recommended is to rename the file to something meaningful. I'm just going to call this one intro speech, and we can just go ahead and type in some text here. Hello world. My name is Grace. Welcome to Super Secret Project. We'll go ahead and save that. So now we have a little bit of text that Amazon Poly is going to speak for us through the host, but there are a few more steps to do. Right below the speech files attribute is gesture map. We'll hit the plus button again and create what's called a default gesture map. That opens the text editor and shows us basically a matching of words and gestures together. Now, the neat thing is when we come back to our speech file, we now have this choice that says auto-generate gesture marks. When I click that one and we come back and edit our little speech file, you can see that there's now markup inside the text file, and that's called SSML, which is the Speech Synthesis Markup Language. And you can look on the Amazon site to find out what these various markups mean.
Quick question for you, Kirby. Is this something new in a newer version of Summerian, or was this there before? Because I don't recall the gesture map there before, but I could be mistaken.
Yeah, I think it's been there at least for as long as I've been playing with the product, so at least a couple of months. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And just to clarify, gesture map means like if I say 1, then the person will lift the index finger to show 1, right? So you create these gestures to make it more realistic.
Yeah, so right now you're not able to create your own gestures, but Amazon provides a number of gestures that the host can emote.
Right. Okay, cool.
So we've gotten a little bit further with our host. We have a speech file with some gestures in there with the SSML. However, if we actually hit the play button right now, nothing would happen. So we need to do a little bit more work on our host by adding a state machine that will tell our host, Grace, when to give our intro speech. So let's go ahead and add a component. This is the state machine component. We're going to hit plus button to add a new behavior. And let's give that behavior a name. I'm just going to call it intro behavior. And our very first state is going to do a wait for AWS to make sure that the SDK is ready to use. We'll add an action to that first state, search for AWS SDK ready, and there's our first state. So now when that happens, we'll transition to the next state. And quite often it's common to put a little bit of a wait in here. I'm going to label my state the same primary action, which is going to do a wait. And instead of 5,000 milliseconds or 5 seconds, I'm just going to call that one 3,000 milliseconds, 3 seconds, and wire that up. The final state we need is to actually tell Grace to go ahead and speak a file. So we'll label that one intro speech. And what we're looking for is the start speech action, which will basically speak a text or SSML file. And since we already have one in place, we can see it in this dropdown. And finally, we just wire that up. So now at this point, the scene, when it starts, will wait 3 seconds, and then Grace will play that announcement. Let's go ahead and hit play and make sure everything's working correctly.
Hello world. My name is Grace. Welcome to Super Secret Project.
So we could see in the state machine that we did go through transitioning from one state to the next, and we've stopped at the end here. So everything looks good. One of the things you may have noticed with the gestures, they seem to last a little bit long for the length of the speech. So we can actually go back in and make some modifications there on the host component. And let's reduce the amount of time on a gesture to maybe like half a second. The other thing that's important here is what's called point of interest. So when we're playing the scene, Grace is going to either just stare off into empty space, or we can say, look at an existing entity. So for now, we're going to say, look at the default camera. That means as we move our position, her eyes will track and her head will track to follow us. So a couple of things that I like to add into a template are to help with prototyping and scale. So as I'm adding entities or models from different repositories, I want to make sure that they're actually scaled correctly. So what we're going to do is go ahead and add a floor that has a texture on it. So we'll create a box. And notice it starts right at the origin. So we're going to go ahead and make some quick changes on the transform of the box. Firstly, let's move that down 0.5 meters. So it's actually the floor. And then we'll scale up by 20 in the X and Z. So now we basically have 20 meters by 20 meters. When we look at the material that's attached to that floor, right now it's just the color white, but we can add a texture to it. So I'm going to open up and browse for a texture here. So I've got a couple of examples. I'm going to bring in this grid at 512 pixels by 512. And it doesn't seem to help us too much at the moment, but if we hit the pencil icon and go edit the texture properties, we can then modify this repeat UV value and say the size of our grid is 2020. So now it's taking that one texture and basically repeating it 20 by 20 times. So if I zoom in, I can start to see some grid lines on the floor. Let's add our next entity that will sort of help with scaling. So I'm going to add another box. Again, it's at the initial origin. So let's transform that one. We'll move it away a couple of meters. And let's click off on the state machine editor so we can see a little bit more in our scene. And at this time, it's okay to leave this as 111. This is a unit cube, 1 meter. But to make it a little more visible, we can go ahead and add a material to this one as well. And I've got this little cube map that we can bring in. And it looks a little strange at the moment, doesn't it? What we're going to do with this one, and I just noticed too that on the transform, I actually want to bring this up 0.5 meter so we can see the entire cube. Let's look at the geometry setting. And for our texture mode, we'll change it to unfolded. So now, as we move through our scene, we can quickly see the positive X, Y, and Z just by looking at the cube. And we also know that it's 1 meter per side. Now, the fun thing, of course, is to actually go into VR, and presently this scene doesn't allow that. So what we're going to do next is look at an experimental asset pack. And we're going to say, let's import. I'm going to filter down by VR. And here's the new experimental VR asset pack. If I click on that, you'll see that it just came out fairly recently. Embedded in the description are links to a tutorial on how to use the asset pack. Let's add that into our scene.
Quick question. Before was the VR core pack. Why is there a new one now? What's the difference? And are they going to deprecate the other one?
They haven't said yet, but I imagine they may deprecate the old one. The new one just makes it a lot simpler to support VR in the sense that one set of scripts can support multiple devices.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't have to write various scripts for, let's say, the Quest or the Go or the Rift or Vive or whatever.
Yeah, there's a little bit less work to wire everything up.
That makes sense. Cool.
Yeah. So we can see down in the asset panel, again, I'm filtering by entity. So in that new asset pack, we have VR camera rig. Let's bring that one into play. And as that comes in, I'm just going to rename a couple of these entities. Let's call this our floor. Makes a little more sense. And our unit cube, let's rename that and call it unit cube. When we look at the VR camera rig itself, you'll notice that it's sort of depicting where a headset would be, and it brings it in again at the origin, which would be kind of right inside our host. So let's do a transform on that as well, and move out away a couple of meters. The other thing we want to check is that in the camera rig component itself, that we have selected this camera rig to be the current one. It is possible to have multiple. Now, having said that, now that we have support for VR, I'm actually going to go back to our host, Grace. Let me close up a couple of these things. And in the target entity, rather than looking at the desktop camera, let's change that so that she's going to follow the HMD camera. There we go. So at this point, if we were to play this and put on our headset, we'd be able to view the scene, but we wouldn't be able to teleport or interact with any of the objects. So we've got a couple more steps to go.
Quick question before we jump into the next steps. I noticed that you opened up the tracker and there is the breakdown for all the controllers and the HMD camera. And you said, look at HMD camera. What if I wanted her to follow, let's say, my right hand? Then I would just pick a controller and she would follow the controllers?
That's right. Now, you can only put one entity for her to track.
Right.
So here's where, this is controller for Vive and this is the controller for Oculus. So you may either have to do some coding so you could dynamically select whichever one is being used, or maybe just say my scene only supports Vive or Oculus.
Well, quick question. Could we create a blank entity, parent those two controllers to that blank entity, and then have it follow the blank entity?
Yeah, that's a very good idea.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's hide this stuff just to clean up a little bit. So yeah, now if we actually want to teleport within our scene, what we're going to do is look at the floor entity, do a little cleanup there. We're going to add a custom script that's provided to us in the new VR asset pack. So let's filter down by scripts. And we'll see that we have currently a couple of choices. One of them is this teleport script. Let's drag that in. And that's all we have to do. So that script will now allow us to teleport anywhere on our floor. So if you wanted to do something like emulate having steps, you could add other entities like boxes to represent the steps and add that script onto those boxes as well.
Quick question. So does that mean that you're now bound by that floor, so you don't have to worry about teleporting outside of that floor?
Presently, it doesn't stop you from going beyond that.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you have to put it to the floor? Could we have put, just as an example, to that box? And what would have happened?
Yeah, if we did that, then we could only teleport onto this box. We'd kind of be bounded at that one location. So if you did want to have, specific points that you could move to, you can certainly do that. You just wouldn't add the script to the entire floor. You would maybe have hidden entities or entities with different textures on them representing where you could teleport to and attach the script to each of those.
I see. But just to clarify, because maybe I'm confused now, you said we attached it to the floor, and then I asked you if you're bound by that floor, and you said, no, you're able to teleport outside of the floor. Would the same thing happen if I just bound it to the box? You'd start there, but you'd still be able to teleport beyond the box?
I think the way it is right now in the experimental form, you would be able to go further outside, but if it's surrounded with entities that don't have the script, that would sort of act as a barrier.
The barrier, got it. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. So one other thing we're going to do, just to finish this off on the VR side, is let's have a look at our unit cube and see what we can do with VR there. So we're going to add a script, but it's a different script. So it's a custom script, and it's called Activate. This one gives us some parameters that we can use at design time. So we can say what is going to trigger an activation on that object, on that entity. So I'm going to say whenever somebody presses down on the action button, we will emit a message into the Sumerian system. And this can be any message you like. I'm going to call mine Activate Unit Cube. Now, once we've done that, we need something to respond to that message. In this case, I'm going to stay with the cube and add a state machine. Let's call this activate behavior. The very first state will be a listen. Let's filter down for listen. And it's important that we type in exactly what the message was. Activate unit cube. There we go. Let's move that over. Let's add our next state. I'm going to call this one scale up. And the action, if we look at scale, we have quite a few things we can do here, but I'm going to pick this tween scale. And we're going to make it 0.2 bigger in each dimension. And we'll shorten the time. Again, this is in milliseconds, so a quarter of a second. And we'll give it a little bit of an effect there. Let's wire those two up. And we'll add one more state that basically does the opposite of the scale up. Call this one scale down. It's going to be the same action. And since we're doing relative here, it's just the opposite value, so 0.2 in this case, to bring it back to the original size. 250 milliseconds. Wire that up and wire that up.
And I'm assuming if you didn't want to do relative, you can just leave it at 000 and it would bring it to the same level, basically.
If you didn't have it relative and you put 000, it would basically make it invisible.
Sorry, not 000. 111. Yeah. If you just put 111, it would bring it back to, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, we've got quite a bit going on in our template or scene. Let's actually turn it into a template. So if we come to the top entity and open up the top component, it's always nice to take a screenshot. So when we're in the dashboard, we can actually see what this template or scene does. So we've got a screenshot in place. And just down here, it says Save Scene as Template. So we'll go ahead and click that one. Here's the reason why we created a project at the beginning. I'm going to save this template into my new project folder. There we go. Template has been added. So if we exit this scene and go back to the dashboard, and we look at our new project folder, there's scenes, assets, and templates. There's our new template. So if we actually want to test this out by creating a new scene based on our custom template, we just hit the Use button. Going to create a scene in my new project folder and give it a name. Let's call this one Test Template.
And I'm assuming this template will now bring in all the required assets that you've imported before. You don't have to do any of that.
That's right. So, for example, if you were making, an interactive storytelling experience or a game that had multiple levels or a set of related training experiences that all had the same look and feel, you could create one template and then make multiple scenes based on that template.
Right. Okay.
Yep. So here we are. The last step is basically to test this, and we simply hit the publish link.
Now we can also test it without publishing, right? Just by pressing play and then clicking on the HMD icon at the bottom right?
That's correct. With the experimental asset pack, with my current setup, I have some issues with that where it's actually better if I publish it and go to it fresh. It seems to work correctly then. The other thing that's important to note is once you have the published URL, if you wanted to test this on a mobile HMD like Oculus Go, a quick tip is to take the URL maybe into Bitly or your favorite URL shortener. That way, when you enter the browser in Oculus Go, it's far easier to type it in if you make something human readable.
Right.
Yeah. So now that we have that URL, if we open up our scene in the browser.
And one thing to keep in mind is you do have to have Steam running, Steam VR.
Yes.
For this to be able to be seen in the headset.
My name is
correct.
Welcome to Super Secret Project.
Okay, so let's go into VR. And in this case, I'm using an HTC Vive. Again, this would support Oculus Rift or mobile things like Oculus Go as well. And at this point, I can see Grace is looking at me. I'm a little low because I'm actually sitting in a chair. I can see that I can teleport to different locations in my space and notice that her eyes and head are turning to follow me. The other thing that's kind of neat, I can see where I'm pressing on the controller. And recall that on our unit cube, we added this activate feature. So if I go ahead and click the trigger, we get this little animation effect that lasted half a second, just to let us know that, that's the item I've actually selected.
And that's scaling up and down every time you click on it.
Correct, yeah.
So Kirby, I noticed that when you teleport or when you put your mouse over the active area in the cube, you have icons. Are those customizable within Sumerian?
Yeah, they are. There are parameters that you can set at design time.
So you can attach like a different icon or something like that.
Yeah, and change colors as well.
That makes sense. Cool. So that pretty much covers it, right? We created some entities, added the host, and then brought in the VR camera. It seemed pretty simple. Not a lot, actually no coding.
Yeah, for this one, we just used the state machine.
Very cool stuff. Anything else you want to cover?
No, that's it. I mean, I'm excited to see what people can build with Sumerian.
Definitely. Kirby, thank you so much for participating in this tutorial. I really appreciate it. If people want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
Yeah, pretty much on social media. I'm at Kirby Shabaga, all one word. The other great way is by joining the Slack community for Amazon Sumerian.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Kirby. And to the rest of you, I'm glad you were here with us. Just a quick reminder, if you want more video tutorials just like this one, assets to practice with, podcast interviews, plus much more, make sure you register for free at howtocreatevr.com. Also, if you are ever in the Southern California area, we have a monthly meetup with lots of great VR, AR, and MR presentations. You can join or RSVP for our next meetup at howtocreatevr.com/meetup. So until the next episode, I'm Marcelo Lewin. Cheers, everyone.